I was telling Mr. Prescott when he was here earlier that I felt pretty good today. I got to bed last night at 6:30 and I was up by 3 o'clock this morning, so I had 8.5 hours sleep. And somebody said to me one time, "Why do you get up so early?" Well, there's a lot of stuff to look at before you go on the air and do the show. Number two, the Kitty Cat Alarm Clock Company. The alarm is set for 3:15. The Kitty Cat Alarm Clock Company thought this morning I should be up at 2:59. I looked at the clock. I know. And the reason that I looked at the clock with such disdain was because the Kitty Cat Alarm Clock Company also woke me up at 10:30 last night. you know, you're there and having a good night's sleep and sleeping through the night, and all of a sudden you're aware that something is pestering you. And you open your eyes, and there's a big furry thing staring back at you. 10:30 in the evening, and you walk into the kitchen and you realize he's got water, he's got food. What's the trouble? And then he starts running around with all of his toys. You're expected to get up and play with him. I did not. I went back to bed. And then, as I say, 2:59 this morning, it all started again. I don't know about you, but I love animals. Sometimes, though, if you think family members try your patience, 9:35, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Can I mention our friends at Dream Room Design? Yes, I'm going to. So I guess since nobody out there objected, I didn't hear a word. Dream Room Design, they are aware that we will have a summer. Despite the weather, we will have a summer. Yes, it's on the calendar. It is on the way. A lot of people would like to enjoy summer in the backyard or maybe even in the side yard or the front yard, but they don't necessarily want to deal with all the biting insects or the blowing sand and things that we have in our area. So Dream Room Design can build you a customized sunroom. All you have to do is go to the website dreamroomdesign.com and look at some of the fine work they've done. They can build over an existing patio or a porch. That's not an issue. Your deck, any of these things are fine. Or they can just build from the ground up. And a lot of people are having this done. And the beauty of it is, too, if you think about it, even on a chillier day like today, you could still sit outside and you don't have to worry about all of that cold wind blowing down through the valley in this situation. So dreamroomdesign.com, not only will you go to that website and see all of the wonderful work that they do, but you'll see the testimonials as well from other customers who've had the work done and are very satisfied. And they can also do finished basements. A lot of people out there are wondering, well, what am I going to do when the family gets a little bit bigger? Well, if you've got a basement, you'd like to finish it, you get a little extra room. The kids can stay there until they move out after their 18th birthday. All right, maybe a little older. This day and age, sometimes they stay a bit longer. However, once they're gone, you still have that finished room, and that's available for all of your uses. So again, go to dreamroomdesign.com. Owner Bill Conant, he's been doing this since the year 2000, going all the way back into the last century. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 46, and we're coming up on 9:37. I'm not surprised at all by this. The Wall Street Journal has an editorial today, America's Coming Tax Increase. With the deficit projected to hit 5% of GDP in only a decade, that's gross domestic product, the choice is either spending cuts or tax hikes. And we're finding out the American people don't like spending cuts because it cuts into all of the programs that they feel they're entitled to. The debt held by the public has approximately doubled since President Obama took office, is now equal to 74% of gross domestic product. Now, at the end of World War II, it was only 104%. We are rapidly approaching that, and that was a bit bigger of a crisis. Letting growth or future belt-tightening close the gap is the exception, not the rule. More often, higher taxes are the result. I did not know this, but it says under the current law, the Congressional Budget Office projected earlier this year that the deficit will grow to over 4% of GDP in 6 years and to 5% in 10. If the CBO's projections are close to correct, there will be strong pressure to raise taxes in the future, regardless of whether a Democrat or Republican is in the White House. And who knows, the way the country is going, it could be somebody other than a Democrat or Republican, albeit they'd try to figure out ways to squash any third party. Ted Cruz, speaking of things I didn't know, makes a value-added tax the centerpiece of his plan, although he prefers to market it as a business flat tax. It substitutes for a variety of other taxes, payroll, corporate, and some income that are paid now. Now, VAT taxes, I have a friend, I was telling Benito this morning when we were between shows, friend of mine used to do business in Denmark, and he was saying that they have a value-added tax there. He said, if you want to buy a new car, let's say you're looking at a car that's $20,000. So it'd be small. They buy small cars there anyway. By the time you get through paying for all the government regulations and initial taxes, you pay about $40,000 for that car. And then you're also paying all the value-added tax. Well, what is that? That's where they tax everything at every step of the production process. So not only are you buying a tax or paying the tax on a car you just bought, you're paying taxes. Let's say the guy who smelted the steel, there's a tax on that. You're paying that. Then the people who assembled that steel, you're paying a tax on that. Then the people who painted that steel, then you're paying a tax on that. You see this? This is where they end up in these European socialized countries taking all your money away. The Danes have been called the most contented people in the world. Contentment, though, is not happiness. And in Denmark, that often comes out of a bottle. Get my drift? 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And you sit there and you think, nah, not going to happen here. I won't pay it. Yeah, somebody's going to pay it. And the government can be very, very persuasive, as we know. We've got more coming up. Speaking of government, efforts to control government. Mike Lee, who's among, I think, the better people serving in Washington, U.S. Senator from Utah, has said that we could at least try to start controlling what government does. Maybe not the spending part of it, but how it sometimes is a little heavy-footed with us, keeping us under the heel. The Daily Signal reports this today. This legislation will curb the power of unaccountable bureaucracy. It says that Senator Lee wants to change that, where government pretty much makes its own rules through enabling legislation. In other words, Congress constitutionally is supposed to be the lawmaking body, but when the EPA and Housing and Urban Development and USDA and all of these other offices of the government are now making their own regulations, it's just, it's like saying when you're paying taxes or a fee, well, that's not a tax, that's a government fee. Well, it's still my own money. Regulations are laws. It's just semantics. It's mixing words up to cover this up. So he has proposed, and it will go to the floor, I believe, for debate today, a solution. Congress will approve new regulations before they become effective. That would shift the responsibility back to where it belongs in Congress. Now, you wouldn't ever, the regulators would have to scale things way back because Congress doesn't have all that amount of time to look at all of these things. There have been tens of thousands of new regulations under President Obama. If we can cut that down every 8 years to just a few hundred, then all the better for you, because this is going to impact your life so dramatically. Callers can reach me at 736-0300, 736-0300. You're up next, and you're on KLIX.
I think they rightly call the bureaucracies the communist branch of government. Well, if you look at it, they carry out all of the communist objectives: take away private property, take away your right to be able to dispose of your property when you try to sell it, and so forth. But the bottom line is we need people. Ted Cruz is the only one that even talks about the Constitution. Unfortunately, Trump never does. But Article 1, Section 8 lists the specific areas where the federal government should be involved in our lives. And we've gotten so far away from that it's, but if we eliminated the EPA and a few of these agencies, eliminate, that kind of stuff is supposed to be at the state level to begin with. We just look at the management of federal lands, our forests up here. Whenever we have a fire in the federal lands, it's much more catastrophic than when it's on the state lands. So why is that? It's because federal bureaucrats, all they care about really is their paycheck. Now, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them. And their hands are tied as well, because I've got friends that work for the federal government, and they're told what to do. And, for example, a friend of mine was putting tank traps in up north up here. He hated what he was doing, but he was close to retirement. And, of course, we bring in the wolves and the grizzlies and all this stuff to drive people off the land into the cities, where we're a lot more manageable, and we have to be good little slaves.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and I thank you for the call. The government workers that I've met, a lot of them, are just disgusted by what they're asked to do. On the other hand, if you want to succeed and get promoted, then you play the game. And those are the dangerous ones. We have another caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
All I've been hearing is like if anybody suggests like lower cost of education, it's like who's gonna pay for it? Who's gonna pay for it? Let's look at this one country that's got no deficit, and they practically give free education. They got an autobahn. How about Germany? Germany has got no deficit. People do pretty well, and they give free education to their students. One of my daughters' friends is from Germany. She's setting up here, but she has to finish over there because it is free as government mandated that they got to study. I just don't get it, people. That's not science. That is for real. You
But
can look
they
at
they have a manufacturing base still that can help cover the expenses. Hello? Hello? Speaking of the Autobahn, Germany is a small country compared to the good old USA. You could fit a lot of Germanys into the map of the United States of America. So this notion that Autobahns and free education and all of that, well, first of all, up until 8 months ago, they had a very homogenous culture, other than a few Turkish guest workers who'd been coming in over the last few decades. But that has suddenly been abruptly changed, hasn't it? But a homogenous culture where everybody was speaking the same language, and the Germans could understand Germans. So if a German called a radio program, you'd know what they were talking about. So they had this homogenous culture. So when you go off and you actually go to college, they don't need to be teaching college, or even in the primary schools, they don't need to be teaching people 1,800 different languages to get them up to speed. But there's a huge manufacturing base still left in Germany. They didn't ship all the jobs off to China or Mexico. Hello. We have another caller looking to join us. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. Yeah, our little drive-by friend does live in Jerome, so one liberal in Jerome.
Yes, and that's probably the reason that the community is in such poor quality right now.
Maybe, but I think the other day I forwarded a deal on Facebook. It was funnier than heck. This guy tries to go into the bank to raise his debt limit. And in the end, he ends up raising his debt limit by having his child sign the loan. And I re-forwarded it and said progressives wouldn't get it.
No.
Because that's exactly what they've done. And these guys keep calling up, talking about spending. We need to figure out how we can tighten our belt, not make our belt bigger.
I happened to come across this today also from the Daily Signal. Speaking of governments that tried to give everything away for free, as the House struggles to find consensus on a plan to rescue Puerto Rico from its debt crisis, an influential conservative legislator today laid out his expectations for what legislation should look like. His name is Raul Labrador. Perhaps you've heard of him. Of course, he was born in Puerto Rico. He has been quiet about the plan being crafted by the National Resources Committee. He's neither a member of the panel or a participant, but he said, during a meeting on Capitol Hill, he said that, any solution that we have cannot affect our states because, he said, otherwise we'll be paying for New Jersey and Illinois and all of these other socialist republics within the United States of America that have bankrupted themselves by trying to give everything away to people for free.
Well, the problem is, Bill, I'm a 1961 model, and I was brought up that nothing is free. Someone has to pay for it. You may be able to eat a meal and it didn't cost you something, but someone paid for it. And the question is, who do you think? Well, everybody goes, the government's paying for it. Name one thing the government does that earns money other than taking it from the pockets of the people that work.
Well, and here's another point to be made.
Everything that they've done fails. Everything that they've done fails. So the post office is in debt. Everything's in debt that they run.
When somebody tells me socialism will work and we can have free college because Germany does it, Germany doesn't pay for its defense. We pay for Germany's defense, and we pay for Poland's defense, and we pay for Italy's defense, and Spain's defense, and Denmark's defense, and Norway's defense, and Finland's defense, and England's defense, and Japan's defense. And holy smokes, folks, all of this talk about how these people are doing so well and doing so much better than the rest of us. Yeah, because we've been paying their freight for them. I wouldn't spend any money on gas if someone else drove me in their car every day, now would I?
No, you wouldn't. I think this might sound funny, but I think what we need to do is pull back, take care of our own, draw a line somewhere, and say, cross it, look out.
Love it. Thank you much for the telephone call. 9:53. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Also, I have an individual. I will not name him because, of course, he's a prominent figure in our community. He sent me a message on this whole Puerto Rico bailout today and said, you know what? This is going to happen, unfortunately, because there are a lot of people who have money invested in Puerto Rico, and they want their money back. By the way, you have a lot of people who are investing pension funds in Puerto Rico, too. Gosh, that was a brilliant idea. And if Puerto Rico goes under, then all of those pension funds go under as well. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Hey, Bill, good morning. Just a quick thought. This fellow that likes to call in and drop an egg or two and then back away, obviously a very young person because he has no clue or refuses to remember that after the Second World War, when Germany laid in ruins, the United States went back in and cleaned that country up and gave them an absolutely fresh start. Their steel industry was brand new. They were able to start over with all new equipment, all new technology, and the United States continued to build and work with the infrastructure that we had and that we had maintained during that period of time. So the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, and the 80s, 4 decades of brand new Germany. And they used it very well. And so they are now at a point where they can decide what they want to spend their extra money on. And if education is one of those things, so be it. But we are in a completely different situation than the new Germany.
And Germany was also helped out because my father, being a member of 3rd Armored Division in the occupation, happened to spend a few years there on a base where there were 17,000 Americans who were all spending. They didn't have anywhere else to spend their money, so they all spent it in Germany. And that was just one base out of dozens of bases scattered all over Germany, and all of these young Americans just spending money like it was going out of style. Also helped revive Germany. This notion that somehow this is a German miracle, I'm sorry to say.
I absolutely agree with you. And I mean, I saw the bases that we used and continue to use in Germany. And a lot of infrastructure money was spent by Hitler and his regime to build bases that were expected to last for 1,000 years, unlike the kind of bases that the United States had built between the 2 world wars. They were expected to just serve through the war, and we continue to use those bases today.
Yeah.
We still have places where World War II barracks are being used for the housing of soldiers.
Thank you for the call. And see, all of these things, when people talk about the beauty of socialism in Europe, again, if the United States was not paying the freight for Europe for the last 70 years, you wouldn't be talking about this. And we'd be talking about how wonderful things were here because we would have had all of this money here that we could have lavished on our own infrastructure and our own educational system. 9:56, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, newsradio1310.com. You know, there were actually some troops during the first Gulf War in the 1990s, early 1990s. A friend of mine was telling me this story because he was called back to active duty for a couple of years to work at the mortuary at Dover Air Force Base. At the old, there was an old base in Lewis, Delaware from World War II, and they just took these guys and housed them back in the old barracks. I've been to those barracks, and I cannot imagine anyone living in them even as recently as 1990. But they did, because we didn't have the money to spend on anything new, because we're spending it all somewhere else. Before we wrap up today's program, and we're getting near the end of the week, of course, I just got to share this with you quickly. Daily Caller has this today. Speaking of government overreach, EPA continues to implement global warming plans Supreme Court said it could not. Well, who's the Supreme Court? The heck with them. Environmental Protection Agency officials are moving ahead with a key part of the Clean Power Plan, despite the court issuing a stay against the agency's global warming plan in February. The move seems to violate the court's stay against CPP, preventing the EPA from implementing its plan to cut carbon dioxide emissions from U.S. power plants. EPA, however, argues it's doing this for states that want to voluntarily cut emissions, despite this being part of CPP. You see, the Supreme Court doesn't have an army that it can send, its own personal army that it can send over there and say, Nope. But Congress has the power of the purse. And if Congress would take its lawmaking power back, first of all, the CPP would be irrelevant. Congress could also tell, what's her name over there, the one that she shares the same barber with me. They could tell her, the administrator at EPA, they could tell her something just plainly, flat out. You're not getting any more money for these issues. So somebody's got to grow up in Washington and say, you know what? Time. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, at newsradio1310.com. God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll be back here tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning. Rush Limbaugh will follow Fox News in just a few minutes after 10 o'clock. And after Fox News at 1 o'clock, Sean Hannity. After 4 o'clock news, Glenn Beck, Dave Ramsey tonight. All of that ahead on KLIX. Have a great day.